Well, hello. In this video, I'd like to take a look at some commonly used SQL select statements. So SQL select statements are the most common statements you will write and work with in a SQL database. For this demonstration, I'll be using Microsoft's Northwind database, which has been around for decades. You can get a copy of the Northwind database by just going out and searching for Northwind script. At times, the other database I use on a regular basis is the pubs database, also been around for decades. Both of these databases are very, very small and very easy to install. You have to locate a copy of them. There are lots of copies around the internet. This is a recent copy from GitHub, in which case they took out a command called spdboption, which hasn't been around for a while. Downloading those files would allow you to open up the file after it's been downloaded, either pubs, Northwind, or both, and then run the script. If you don't highlight any script code in the script, I should say, it'll run all of the code. So I don't highlight anything. I just execute the entire script. It makes a brand new copy of the Northwind database, our pubs database, and now a brand new copy of the Northwind database. If you get a copy of the script that has the spdboption stored procedure call in it, just ignore it. It doesn't really hurt anything to get that error message that it can't find that stored procedure. But if you download the latest version from, in this case, GitHub, then that won't be a problem. Now, once you have those two databases installed, then you can start using them. And for my example, I'm going to go ahead and use the Northwind database and try out our first select statement. This first select statement is quite simply the three basic clauses of a select statement: the select clause, the from clause, and the where clause. The select clause is where you list the columns that you want to display. The from clause is where you list where you're going to get the data that you want displayed. And the where clause is where you restrict some of the data from being shown. So show me only some of the data. So if I leave off the where clause, I get all of the data. If I use the where clause, I get only some of the data. The where clause restricts the rows that you will be shown. The select clause restricts the columns that you will be shown. Select from where is indeed the most common set of clauses you will use in a select statement. And you can type it out in a bunch of different ways. Some people like to stack out the column listing vertically. It's the popular choice. Sometimes they'll put the commas in the back. Sometimes they'll put the commas in the front. It doesn't make any difference. SQL just doesn't care. You can use the full name of the database, the namespace or schema, and the table, or you could actually just use only part of it, the name of the table, the name of the namespace of the table, the name of the database, the namespace of the table. As far as the where clause goes, you could also stack that out vertically as well. Again, SQL just won't care. In fact, it goes so far as not caring if you type out the code like this. I would say that that is the least professional looking code that you could probably type out. A better choice would be to try to be consistent with any particular script that you write. Try to make it so that all the columns are either stacked out vertically or horizontally, collectively in that script. When you write a new script, make a new query window, and you go through and you start typing in your code, make a decision and kind of stay with that theme. Again, SQL doesn't care, but it does look more professional if you're consistent. The select clause can actually be used alone in the select statement. So you might see something like this, where somebody uses the database engine as a very fancy calculator, or should I say simple calculator. Expensive calculator might be a good choice of words. Select 5 plus 4 or 5 times 4 actually does perform an action, performs a calculation, and displays the results. You'll notice that the results don't have any column headings. If you'd like to give it a column heading or alias, you can do so like this. Put the name of the alias or column name, if you would, and tell it what that column's data is going to equal. Now we see that we have a column name in the result set. The use statement focuses on a different database file that you're working with. If I'm in pubs, I can use the use statement to focus on Northwind. Once I've focused on a particular database, I no longer need to identify the name of the database because I've already focused on the one I want to use. The DBO portion of the name of the table on Microsoft SQL Server is a default, and as such, I can leave that off too. However, what I can't leave off is the square brackets here. That's because somebody who made the Northwind database put a space in the table name. Order space details is one table. Its name has a space in it, and as such, you need to use square brackets. Square brackets can be applied to a column alias. In the case of a column alias, you can either use square brackets, double quotes, or single quotes. In the case of the name of a table or column that has a space in the name, double quotes are recommended. Square brackets are recommended. As far as what's recommended on the column alias, to tell you the truth, it doesn't matter all that much. I prefer the square brackets to be used for everything. It just makes things a little bit easier. There's lots of different styles. I could use the single quotes, like I said, double quotes or square brackets, but notice that in this particular case, the alias is after the calculation that we want to perform. In this case, I want to average the unit price in the order details table. So the column alias could be in the front or left-hand side of the calculation or expression or column listing, or on the right-hand side after it. If it's on the left, you have to have an equal sign. If it's on the right, you have to have an ASCII word. Well, that's not true. You can actually do the lazy style, but I think it makes it hard to read. One of the advantages of using square brackets when you're identifying an object, the object name being the table name or the column name, is that is the fact that if you use double quotes to identify a table name, although it will work sometimes, it may not work all of the time. There's a setting called quoted identifier off or on. When you turn it off or on, it changes the ways that double quotes work. If I'm dealing with a table name and I have the quote identifiers off, double quotes won't work. Square brackets would have, but double quotes won't work. Let me show the square bracket version and see that even with the quote identifiers off, the square brackets are working, the double quotes are not. Let me turn that quote identifier feature back on, which is a default. And then if I run this with the double quotes, it works again, and that's because when the quoted identifier feature is on, you can use double quotes to identify an object, a table or column. Column aliases don't really care about the setting. So if I were to turn this back off again and put square brackets around this, this would work because the square brackets are being used, thus meaning that it doesn't care about the quotes. and it doesn't really care about the quotes on the column alias. So you could make a case that you're going to use double quotes for column aliases or single quotes for column aliases, and then square brackets to identify any table or column or any other object. I could just say, you know what, that's just all too confusing. I'm just going to stick with double square brackets every place. And that's kind of what I recommend. That way, you don't have to really think about much. The from clause is the next clause you need to think about when you're working with a select statement. In the from clause, you identify where the data is coming from. So I identify that I want to display the product name, and I want to get the data for the product name from the products table. You can use a single table like this, and as I mentioned, you can identify the table name more formally by putting in the schema, the namespace. In this case, the namespace in Microsoft SQL Server is the database owner. DBO is database owner. It's a default namespace. If I'm working with another database product like Oracle, I'd probably have to actually put in something more specific. It's kind of a cultural difference between the way Microsoft SQL Server works and the way other database software works. And the Microsoft SQL Server culture, DBO gets used a lot. As I mentioned, you can also put in the full name of the database name, the schema, and the table. You're just identifying where you're getting the data. I am currently in the Northwind database, but if I fully name the path to find the customers table, I could be in a different database and still access the data from Northwind. That is an advantage of using the fully qualified name. If you know that there's a default, you can actually just use 2 dots. You need to keep the chain of the default going. What I mean is the chain being the database name, the schema, and the actual object you're trying to query data from. But you don't need to actually put in the DBO if you know the default is going to work. I'm not entirely convinced that that's your best choice because I think it confuses people. But if you ever see that code, now you know what it means. You can actually get data from multiple tables at once. You do so by joining the data from those tables. I want the product name and I want the category name, but the product name is in the products table and the category name would be in the categories table. As such, the way I get the data from both tables is I just say I want to get it from products and join the products table to the categories table based on a category ID being in both tables. As long as it can find a matching value for the category ID in both tables, it can bring back the result. This is something we'll need to look at in a different video in more detail, but it's certainly a very handy tool to be able to combine data from multiple tables. And sometimes when you see people write code like this, you'll see that they use an alias for the table, which is different than the alias for the column in that it's not used to display anything. It's just convenient for not having to type out the full name. The where clause is the third member of the most common way you type out a select statement. In this case, the where clause, as I mentioned, is filtering the number of rows that you will be seeing. On line 120, I have an example where I'm saying I only want to see one particular product. That's the chai product based on its product name. Putting the where clause in, it only shows me some of the rows. If I come down here and I do the same thing, oh, look at this. I'm actually using 2 tables, but I didn't put in the word join. Turns out that the where clause can be used to identify the connection between the two tables using what's known as the old-fashioned or non-ANSI join. This means that the where clause is still filtering what data you're going to see. It's just restricting only seeing customers that have both a customer ID in the orders table and a matching customer ID in the customers table. If I want to use that older syntax, the non-ANSI, American National Standards Institute syntax, I can definitely do so. And if I want to have a filter after that, I just use an AND keyword to combine it. The modern syntax is to use the word join. Inner join, outer join, doesn't really matter all that much. Inner joins combine only the matching rows. Outer joins can combine the matching rows plus any non-matching rows, just leaving a null when they don't match. If you don't put the word inner join in, it's going to imply that it's an inner. This is the same code that we basically saw above. So is this. Inner join. The inner part is implied. And of course, the where clause is being used to filter out the data. Notice that with this newer style join, you don't use the where clause to identify the connection. That was one of the major changes that they made back in 1992 when they recommended this newer syntax. With the newer syntax, the where clause is being used only to filter out the results after the join has been created. So a where clause can be used to filter out the rows. It can be used sometimes at a join and sometimes after a join. Common options that you use in a where clause would include using keywords like the word like. With like, you do a very basic pattern match. You do so by using wildcard symbols. Percentage sign means that any match that is 0 or more of those characters is fine by it. I'm not sure I really explained that well. Let's just say if I were to look at this data and ask the question, is it true that this first row has a CH and then 0 or more characters after it? The answer would be yes, that is true. The percentage sign means 0 or more characters follow. And as such, that's a match. How about Chang? Yep, that's true too. CH, and then after that, it doesn't care about the other characters. That's a match for it. When it gets down to the next one, though, not a match. Next one is a match. Next one is a match. Next one, not a match, and so on. And as such, when we run this, we'd only see the ones with the name starting with C and H. If you want to skip over a single character, you can just use a underscore. In this case, it says anything that starts with a C and then any other letter after that, but it has to be followed by a, the letter A. And after that, I don't care. It can be 0 more characters after that. So in this case, that's going to be, there's not many choices in here. Looks like, let's see, it looks like all three of these matched up just fine. But you can use that to indicate a single missing character. Another one I kind of like is the between keywords, where you get a range of values. So with the between option, you can see I'm filtering the number of products based on, well, in this case, the value in the units in stock column. I can go ahead and say, okay, I want to see only values where the units in stock is between 0 and 35. I could also go through, let me change this around. I'm going to hold down the control button, highlight the code, left click, keep holding the control, drag and drop. I'll do a quick copy and paste in this environment. I'm going to change the where clause over so that we're looking at the product ID. And I'll say the product ID between product number 1, and how about, I don't know, something small. Let's say 5. You can see that I'm now looking at products 1 through 5. Notice that in this language, it's inclusive. Sometimes a language uses, when a language uses an operator like between, it'll either exclude or include the outer boundaries. And it really depends on the language. But here we can see that both 1 and 5 were included. You can even do this with named values. So character values. If I go through and run this, I only see the ones with the characters up to including CHA, CHA, AAA, CHE, CHE, and then CHO. If I got to anything past that, CHS, I'm sure there is a CHS, but if there was one, CHY, I wouldn't see it. It would be outside the range. Another one I like to use is the in operator. With the in operator, you can put a list together of the things you want to see. And if it's in that list, you get it back. In this case, I'm using units in stock, but of course it could be in a list of product names, in a list of product IDs, anything that you could form a list of. And if you want, you can mix and match. You can add on pretty complex where clauses. So I want to find something that starts with a T, product name that starts with a T. But after that, let's see, what other options are on? Oh, if it has product ID of 46, I'm good with that. The or clause means that it's acceptable either or. However, the and clause is exclusive. It's got to be 46 and the price has got to be more than 16. If it's not both, you won't get it back with the and keyword. For the or clause, it's either one, if it starts with a T or matches this and clause. That's good enough for it, and you get it back. Let's see what we get. So we get a bunch of T's. I don't see anything that doesn't have a T. I don't see 46 in here, do you? That probably means that this condition here was not met. I believe there was a 46. Let's go look. There it is. So if the condition had been, so the condition was 16, we didn't see it because it didn't meet that condition. It wasn't both true that it was 46 and the price was greater than 16. If you have some kind of selection that you'd like to reverse, you can use the not operator. In this case, I'm looking for a list of customers that have orders. I get all my list. And once I have that, I can look in the customers table for more information about like the company name. In the orders table, they don't have a company name. So I'll just get the list first and then go through and show the customers that were in that list. This is called a subquery. If I wanted it to change that to the opposite, I just put the not operator in there, and that changes it so that I'm looking at customers who do not have orders. This is a really popular query to write and use because, well, sometimes you want to see who's not doing something, in this case, not ordering. Another one you may find useful is examining null values. If I look in the suppliers table in Northwind, I see that there's a lot of columns that have null, or a lot of rows that have null values, indicating to me that they don't have a fax machine, or a fax phone number anyway. So if that's the case, I can examine which ones are null by using the Is Null operator. I see only all the ones that don't have a fax number listed. I want to be careful not using equal sign because years ago it was determined by the American National Standards Institute that if you don't know what a value is, you cannot compare it to another unknown value and say that they're equal to each other. So if I have an unknown on one hand, let's say the left, and an unknown on the right hand, let's say the word null, of this equal sign, you can't say they're equal if they're two unknowns. Now, some people would disagree with that. Seems like an unknown and an unknown might be equal. And as such, Microsoft allows you to turn on and off this standard. The standard feature is called the ANSI null setting. By default, null does not equal null. And when it's on, it matches the ANSI, American National Standards Institute's recommendation. If you leave it on, then if you ask the question, is it true that null equals null? You will get back the answer, false. No, that is not true. But if I change this to off and ask the same question, it will now evaluate to true. Anyway, no matter what the setting is, the is null will always work. And as such, it's far superior to use is null instead of the equals null option. I would say, though, that you will still see the equals null used on occasion. So you might want to be careful. One thing that you'll see in a lot of scripts that get generated, let's say I come over here and I try to generate a script. Let's see, how about Northwind? I'll look at the tables and I'll generate a script that creates a categories table. You notice that at the top, Microsoft has included these commands. Set the ANSI nulls to on and set the quote identifier option to on. Now, after that, they don't really have anything that has an equals null, so it doesn't really help it, at all. But they're just making sure to cover their bases, making sure that if you did have something in your script that might change the way the ANSI nulls would behave, or have an impact on the way the ANSI nulls were configured, I should say, this would actually guarantee that the setting was either on or off. The default, again, is on. And the quote identifiers, as we mentioned, was using quotes around the name of like a table or column. You notice that they don't even use that. They're not even using that because they're using square brackets to indicate things. Meaning that these are both probably not necessary. But when you see them in a script, you'll now know what they mean. So that's the basics of the three common select clauses, select from where in a select statement. After this, we'll move on to looking at a few more clauses that I think you'll find useful. Next one being order by. I'll see you in that video.